One of the more common questions we get at Church Answers involves ministries that occur in the building. And these ministries that are tied to the church, should they be self-supporting or not? This is obviously a question that involves finances, but also a bit of, just practical sort of ways of connecting with ministries. So you've got churches that have Christian schools, preschools, Mother's Day outs, and other similar ministries. Should these ministries be financially self-supporting or not? And the answer is not always clear. So we're here to talk about 6 key issues involving ministries that are often tied to the church building. So, Dad, I think this is a very important topic because if you don't have a ministry in your building, or even if it's a part of the church, a lot of churches are considering this now, and I think they should be considering it. So it is something that is a worthwhile topic for today's discussion.
Yeah, and I'm going to go into 2 areas. It's kind of a prelude to all of this, Sam. This is a financial question. This is a facility question. This is a stewardship question. There are a number of paths that we can go. One of our ministry partners is Belay, and we brag on Belay all the time.
Don't delay, call Belay.
Yeah, that's our slogan for them. It seems like we always have a Belay person at Church Answers. That's not exactly true because sometimes we buy out the contract. But we either have someone who used to be at Belay or someone who is currently.
I don't know if they want us talking about that, but
they don't mind. They really.
I mean, but they brought us some such good people. They're like, we want you on our team. We're going to steal you.
Sam, that's why the contract has a buyout.
And, no, I know it's in the contract. I know that.
And we abide by that. So I'm going to ask Amy to put the link to Belay in there because there are just so many financial questions involved in this, and some of it may involve personnel. And gosh, Belay is the best one to try someone. Quite frankly, we've always tried someone. We've always been very enthusiastic about who God and Belay gave us. So we'll put the link there. They have virtual assistants, they have web specialists, they have bookkeepers, social media, on and on and on and on. But I know I'm getting off track. The other area that we're going to talk about very much so is facilities. We hear a lot about church facilities. One of our partners is Brown Church Development Group, and we're in constant conversation with Brown. I mean, anytime we get hey, who should we go to build or renovate our church? We're always talking about Brown. So now that I've mentioned that, I'll ask Amy to put that in the show notes as well. But this is a facility question as well. So here's the big underlying question. Should these ministries, should this day school, should this Christian school, should this Mom's Day Out, or one of the questions came up is MMO, Mom's Morning Out. And they're all kind of acronyms there. Should they be self-supporting or not? And as Sam indicated, that is the question that we're going to try to answer today. The first point we want to go to is there are a number of different ministries with a similar function. Sam, I just started naming some of them. Mother's Day Out, Mother's Morning Out, Christian School, Christian Preschool. Now with the growth of homeschool, a lot of homeschool co-ops meet in churches as well. So when we're talking about this is a growing area, and I know you've seen it at West Bradenton as well.
Yeah, every church that I've pastored, except for the Church of Herbie, which was my mega church of 6 people. That was my first church.
Right.
Every church has had a day school, or I started one, or some variation thereof. We've had Kids of the Kingdom in Indiana. We have a preschool here at West Bradenton. I started a Mother's Day Out program at my other church where I was in Florida. So this is actually something that I think is a viable way of doing ministry in the community. And if you're not doing this, I think it's something you should consider, particularly if you have a facility that's just empty throughout the week. I want to see the building occupied and doing ministry 7 days a week. I don't think the building itself just needs to be a Sunday only building. So I think this is a good way to partner with other ministries if you don't want to do it just as your church, and fill that building throughout the week.
And that's a good segue into the point that the ministry that will use your facilities, even though they may be adjunct or just renting space, you still need to know their purpose. You need to know that it is not unaligned with the church, and even better if it is aligned with the church. So you don't just accept anyone that says, "Hey, I want to use your building." That is obvious, but the closer you can get it aligned with the purpose and the heartbeat of the church, the better. And that's what I've seen in the places you've been, Sam.
Yeah, and I'll also say that you have to be very careful about for-profit activities occurring on your campus. So we get any number of requests because we have about 50,000 square feet total here at West Bradenton, which is not massive, but it's definitely a larger campus. And a lot of times people want to do some, hey, can I bring, my karate class to do whatever on your campus, or my volleyball group, or what have you. Um, so we tend to say yes if it's a local school or something like that, or another nonprofit. But there are some stipulations there. You've got to be really careful about having commerce occurring on your campus. So one of the things that we've done to help filter a lot of the requests for the facility is we just flat out, unless it's a nonprofit 501c3, the answer is always no. Just because it just makes it easy for us to filter the requests, and we get plenty of requests. So our campus is occupied. I mean, it's 7 days a week. There is rare that there's a day that somebody's not in the office. The campus is empty. I'm empty. It's almost always occupied. And we have a preschool, not a day school. We have actually a preschool here that we partner with the Christian school that's down the road, and we've kind of combined ministries here in a very good partnership with Bradenton Christian School. That's the name of the school. I don't know that anybody cares, but you can look it up. And their preschool is on our campus, and I absolutely love it because there's kids that there's life, there's fun. They have chapel in our sanctuary. I think it's great. Now we have a very clear understanding of who they are, what they're doing, why they're there. We have a very simple agreement, but there is an agreement in place. And I think that's the way to go. You can't just have anybody on your campus.
Well, that brings up a kind of a defining moment type of question. This is my default, Sam, and I will probably get some who will disagree, but I always go in with the default of that ministry should be self-supporting. And if it shouldn't be, you need to tell me why. So I go with that default because there's so many issues when an organization becomes dependent upon the church to pay part of their way. I don't think that is wrong, but I say I start off with the default. It should be self-supporting. Now, don't cut off the podcast now because we got some more information to build onto that, but that's where I start.
I agree with you. If it is a revenue producing ministry, the goal needs to be self-sustaining for any revenue producing ministry.
Good point.
There are some ministries that by design, they don't produce revenue. They're not providing a service or selling a product, and that requires donations. But in the case of a day school or a preschool or something of that type, well, it's tuition. There's tuition coming in. And the best way for that ministry to be viable for the long term is to be self-supporting, to have, revenue that matches expenses, and to create a business model that works. You know, is that the case for all of them? I would say it doesn't have to be. And you may be strategic, as we're going to talk about in the next point, you may be strategic about how you fund it. But I think I think that's a good way to look at it. The default setting needs to be, if this is a revenue producing ministry, we've got to figure out a way for it to be self-supporting. Otherwise, you're just breeding entitlement into the system, and it can get a little wonky on you. It can become a tail wagging the dog if you're not
Sure
careful.
Can. And let me speak to any of these ministries that might be listening to this podcast. Maybe a pastor has said, I want you to listen to this podcast. and they give it to a day school director or a preschool director or something of that nature, Christian school director. I want to speak to you for just a moment. You need as much as possible to be self-supporting, because here's what can happen. A new pastor can come in with a new direction and lead the church to say, we don't want this ministry in our building anymore. I know that sounds a bit cruel, but it happens. You need to be self-supporting because you are living on rented space, and something can happen where you no longer have that space. So you need to be as self-supporting as possible. That's
I've done
that,
that. When I
good.
go to a church and there's a day school there, we had at my previous church, we had a very large school of performing arts that was not in the black. And one of my first objectives was, we're going to get this in the black. Like, there's no reason why this shouldn't be producing a surplus. Now, who, this was a ministry of the church. So let's be very clear. There's ministries in the church and there's ministries of the church. So in the case of our partnership with the local Christian school, it's not our 501c3 that is the preschool. We're allowing them in our space. So that's a little different thing. But especially if this is a ministry of the church where it's attached to the church's 501c3, even more important that the revenue producing ministry be in the black. And so when I went to my previous church, that's one of the first things I did. I sat down with the director and I said, listen, we got to get this thing in the black. He did a great job. He said, you know what? I agree. Let's work on that. And it ended up being even better. But to your point of new pastor coming in, well, guess what? That's what I've done. I've done that to these ministries. I've gone in and said, we're not going to be funding this anymore. We're going to figure out a way to make this work from a business perspective. Now, thankfully, the people I've worked with all did a phenomenal job, and we got there in very short order. But that regime change, yeah, it's a very real risk that you have. And if you're self-supporting, it's much less of a risk.
Let's do some term definition right now. 501c3 is the IRS classification of an organization that is considered a nonprofit. It has to be approved by the IRS. So when you hear Sam or me talk about a 501c3, we're talking about a nonprofit that's approved by the Internal Revenue Service. When we say in the black, that is a accounting term that means the revenue the revenues are greater than the expenses. So in the black. Third term that I'm about to mention is indirect cost. And I want to give you a definition of that. Indirect costs are those costs that that you incur that you cannot immediately see. So let me give you an example. A Christian school, is in a church, and they're paying their way according to the terms, but the church is incurring a large amount of overhead costs, like we need to keep a janitor on staff longer. We've got to have more safety personnel around security personnel. And even though they're part of the church and paying for it, one of the reasons they're getting that additional cost is because we've now got a school there or a preschool there. So an indirect cost would be, okay, the church is probably going to still have these costs anyway, but you are causing them to continue the cost or causing them to increase. Did I explain that well enough, Sam?
Yes, you did. And I can give a very real example. So we had a day school at my church in Indiana, and run very well. Marcia, if I remember her name right, was running it. I think she's still running it to this day. Did a great job. There was a teacher in the school one day that was arrested on campus. The police came to her place of employment and arrested her for some things that she had done. And when she got out on bail, she was mad at the church for allowing that to happen, even though we couldn't have helped it. So she brought a baseball bat and bashed out all the interior windows. So the question comes up: indirect cost. Who's paying for that?
Who pays for the windows? Yeah.
Who's paying for the windows? Is it the day school? Is it the church? Which budget is this coming out of? So there are always, I give that example. It's a bit of an extreme example. That is a true story. That being said, there's going to be things that come up, and like crayons, markers, utilities. You need to work through all of that. And again, there's several different ways that you can do it, but you need to make sure that you are clear and that you are consistent in whatever you're doing.
And depending upon what type of ministry you are in a church building, school, or similar ministry, there are usually rules of thumb available for what that indirect cost would be. For example, your lease is this, but we'll put another, this is pulling it out of there, 20% on it to cover any indirect costs that are occurring. So you have that opportunity. And so we bring that point up. Do you just charge them a lease payment, or do you increase the lease payment by amount that would cover indirect costs? We don't have the answer to that. We're just saying you should have the question to that, because you may think that you've covered all your costs, but you haven't really considered indirect costs. You don't know when the next time that a mad person is going to come into your church and with a baseball bat and break out all the windows. So that is something you consider. Point number 5. This is something that I can't. It's one of the Rayner sons, and it could be you, Sam. The church should consider if they want any part of the ministry to be part of the missions budget. In other words, if you are subsidizing, you really need to consider that part of your ministry missions budget. I hadn't thought about that, but we can put it there anyway.
Yeah, that comes from me. So in the cases where the church says, because of our strategic focus, because we want to do this, because we're choosing to do this, we are going to subsidize this particular ministry that's in the church. Um, that could be a day school or Mother's Day out or whatever, and it is part of that strategy. Well, you know what? That's local missions. Put that as a line item in your missions budget instead of it just kind of being absorbed into the church budget and you're not exactly sure what all of those costs really are. It is much easier to track and to understand if you're truly subsidizing. Okay, the reason that we're subsidizing this is because of local missions. This is missions. This is outreach. This is us being a good neighbor to the community. This ministry exists for the community. We're going to subsidize part of it very intentionally. Make that part of the missions budget. I think that's a much better way to go because it keeps things separate, and it also keeps that at the front of your people's their minds, that this ministry is supposed to be for the sake of outreach into the community. So if you have a day school, the reason we're doing this is so that we can serve the community, so that hopefully we can win some of these people to Jesus, assimilate them into the body of Christ. So then it becomes, this subsidy is not so much an entitlement, which is our last point, but it's more a very strategic part of the mission.
And that is a good segue into the last point. Look, financial support will turn into entitlement unless you have some clear understanding on the front end. It will turn into entitlement. And the moment that you pull away an entitlement, the moment the person argues and gets mad and fusses and says, no, we've always done that. You've always supported us. Sometimes an entitlement can hinder one of these ministries from moving forward because they don't have to think. I mean, I've seen that in, say, denominational life, where an organization gets some type of funds for something in any denomination, and it can become, oh, we're just going to get this anyway. And so they don't think outside the box, don't think about what the future is, because this money is going to come in no matter what. Think of that
Yeah,
same danger.
yeah,
Sam?
I completely agree. That sense of entitlement, boy, it can make you look like an ogre. It can make you look so bad as a lead pastor when you have to make tough decisions, or if you're an administrative role, or if you're an executive pastor, the one making the call, and all of a sudden you have to pull that away, for a strategic reason, for a very good reason. Man, people can get all up in arms, and they have the emotional pull of, you're hurting let's say you have a day school, you're hurting the kids by doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
There are all kinds of little gotchas on this that once you pull it away, if you haven't done some on the front end.
Yeah, yeah, you're taking money from the children to pay your salaries. I mean, the spin on the entitlement can make you look so bad. So there's a good way to avoid this. Just don't do it in the first place. And if you do, again, make it part of the missions budget and make that very clear as to what you're doing. I think every person in the missions budget needs an annual renewal. So it's a 1-year commitment.
Great point.
And if you make a 1-year commitment, guess what? It's just a 1-year commitment. Now, sure, if you want to renew it every year, that's fine, but it needs to be made clear that we're doing this for 1 year. And that's part of, as we've talked about in previous episodes, zero-based budgeting, which is very important, where all of those line items reset to zero. So you can go back and listen to that episode, Google it, and check it out.
Zero-based budgeting. Absolutely. Well, Sam, this has been, I think, an important discussion, because it will become more and more common in churches in the days ahead. And you'll see more of it coming as you have homeschools and homeschool co-ops meeting in church facilities as well. We want to thank you for being a part of Arena on Leadership. Man, I love this book by Alyssa Childers called Another Gospel. Tyndale released this book. You got to get it now. They have the resource, the video resource with it, so that you can use it as a part of your small group. There's some of the questions they ask. Have you encountered the idea of progressive Christianity but aren't sure how to respond? Well, Alyssa Childers, author, blogger, speaker, she's everywhere. This book and curriculum will just help you to deal with these issues. My friend Lee Strobel, one of the greatest guys in evangelism that is alive today, he said, this may be one of the most influential books you will read this year. If Lee says it, it's gold to me. So just go to alyssachilders.com, look in the show notes, where we're getting all kind of cultural questions, all kind of cultural issues. This is a book that you need in your church. So go get it and just let your church be blessed by the wealth of knowledge by Alyssa Childers. Thank you for being a part of Rainer on Leadership. Sam and I are always glad to be with you. We thank Amy and Akeem for all the work that they do as we're speaking, doing so much more work than we do, and we thank them for that. We thank you for watching us on YouTube or listening at your favorite podcasting app. Give us a rating and review, please, or subscribe at YouTube. Just let us know that you're there. This is a ministry that Church Answers provides to you at no cost. Let the world know that we're providing it, and that will be your way of telling us thank you for doing it. Thank you, as always, for being at Church Answers, where we're helping churches and church leaders get healthier together.